We are continuing our series on adventure, and you're going to hear what I had in terms of what came to me as I studied this passage late last night. So we're looking at Colossians chapter 3, so if you have a Bible, if you could turn there, they're at the end of the rows. You can Google Colossians chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 22 to chapter 4, verse 1. And if you are new to the church, you might not realize what's going on in terms of our sermon series. We're doing a series called Adventure, and I'm not sure if you feel like you're a very adventurous person. When we think about an adventurous person, it's someone who does the unfamiliar. There's that sense of excitement. They're always doing and going to exciting places and learning new skills. And if you're more like me, I can easily feel a lot of life is quite monotonous, mundane. We play it safe. I went to Wetherspoons last night. I ordered the exact same thing I always order from Wetherspoons. Sat at the same table, had the same drink. Woke up today, had porridge. I have porridge every morning of my life. My life's not very exciting, and yet what is so wonderful as a Christian, if we know the Great Commission of Matthew 28, those marching orders to every disciple, is that you have an adventurous life. You are called on an adventure because you are called to make disciples and to go into the world. And that might be a far-off nation somewhere else, but for many of us, the going is our daily going, even in Purley and a little bit beyond. It's the opportunities we have and we can easily take for granted where we get to tell people about Jesus and show his goodness. And so we've looked at some of the key relationships that we find ourselves in. We've looked at the different domains of our life. James, over the last couple of weeks, has looked at family and how we can be a witness there in our own household, extended family. We've looked at the importance of friendship, and it'll be really good to hear from Phil, who has written a great book on friendship and will be equipped more for that. And today we're going to look at the adventure of work. And you might be thinking, it's a Sunday. Do we have to talk about work? I know this is your job, Tim, but to talk about work is maybe not something we like to talk about on our weekend. We don't want to already be thinking about the busy week ahead. And to be a witness in the workplace, it's maybe in the workplace that we're really not at our best. That if I was to suddenly appear in your work environment and observe you in your office, maybe you're just worshipping, you're typing, and it's all a prayer, it's all deep worship to Jesus. But in reality, as I know when I was a teacher and even as a pastor working, can often be not at my best. We can be in a very stressed and strained environment. Relationships, we're on kind of walking on eggshells. We can feel that we're just met with all these unfair demands in the workplace. The challenge and the kind of pressure to cut corners with certain things. The competition, the competitive nature of the workplace, these are all things that we find hard, and therefore we're going to find very hard to be a witness through them. I remember teaching, going in, get to school at 7:30. It felt like a spiritual battle. My nemesis, the printer. Remember, I had like 300 worksheets to print. Probably I wasn't a good witness for the environment, and then it never worked. That printer never worked, and the stress, and then your screen isn't turning on and you've got kids coming in. And I remember someone said to me, if you're remotely ill, Mr. Allen, do not come into school because the kids will pick up and they will eat you alive. And workplaces can be very hard, challenging situations. And as has been mentioned, there's a curse of work. We live in the time where the fall is upon us. There's struggles and strains, and it's hard and it's difficult. And like all relationships, there's so much frustration. But with all this in mind, Genesis 2:15 says this. When God created the world, it says the Lord God took the man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. That was his mission. That was his calling, to take the wonderful earth, to use his skills and to cultivate the land. And I hope from what I share this morning we'll have a new vision for our workplace, that it will become a place of worship and actually a place where we share the goodness of Jesus, both with word and in deed. So Colossians 3:22 onward. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favour, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs. And there is no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right or just and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. And there ends the reading of God's holy word. The word that, of course, will stick out for us in terms of this work situation is the challenging concept of slaves, masters and slaves. They're terms, because of our horrible history of the African slave trade, they will not sit very well with us. And we won't go into detail about slavery in New Testament times and the Roman Empire, but just to show how quite different in terms of what we understand by modern slavery, which obviously still goes on today all over our world. In the Roman Empire, up to 50% of the population were slaves. And this kind of slavery was very diverse in what it meant. It wasn't an ethnic thing. But as you see, if you look at the context, we have what's known as the household codes that Paul gives in Colossians. He also does that in Ephesians. And it looks at the household in terms of man and wife, in terms of parents with children, and then also the relationship within a family and a slave, because many households had slaves. Someone who was working, they were like a bond servant or a bond slave. They were paying off a debt. So they were given a house, they had things that they had to do, and you could imagine there was a whole range when there kind of wasn't the kind of welfare and policies and procedures of the workplace today, where some people were looked after and treated as a family member and treated really kindly, and then of course some people were treated very badly. So just to get you thinking that when it's talking about masters and slaves, it is quite a good comparison for us today to talk about masters as employers and then slaves as employees. So really, with that in mind, let's look at a vision for how we spend 8 hours a day for working full time, doing a vision for what this is and how we can use the thing that consumes a lot of our time to really be a witness. The first thing to say as we look at this passage is, when it comes to work, Paul really wants us to question our heart's motivation of why we work. It's a really good book on work. If you're going to read one good book, read Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavour. It's a great book, and he describes we need to think about the work beneath the work. And by that he's saying, why are we doing what we are doing? What are we really working for? Do we do our job primarily because we want approval from our boss? We want validation by our parents? We want to look like a really good person? It's about our prestige and our social status that comes from having our job. We look at our LinkedIn profile with glee. We look at that picture and we think, oh yeah, you're a really important person. Is it for financial security? We all need to make money to pay our rent or our mortgage. But by how far does that drive us? And this is something we need to look at, because before we can be a witness in the workplace, if in reality we are worshipping our work, we need to unravel that. Because if we're so focused on work and we only live to work, and that's where we get our identity, then we've got a problem in the first place. The great preacher Martin Lloyd-Jones, who before he was a pastor was a doctor, as in a medical physician, he once said that there are many whom I have had the privilege of meeting, whose tombstones might well bear the grim statement, born a man, died a doctor, or whatever their job was. And the tragedy really that someone's worth, who they are, what they're known for, all that mattered to them was their job. Nothing about their character, nothing to reflect on the sort of person they were in relationship with others. We need to let that be a challenge for us. If work has taken over, it's consumed all that we are, that doing, that performing. Verse 22 talks about that we work with the sincerity of heart, and we do so in reverence for the Lord, in fearing the Lord, as one translation says it. So the motivator here, as in with being a husband or wife, as in being a parent, as in being an employer or an employee, is we know that the ultimate boss is not our earthly master, but it is our heavenly Father. And I don't know if that causes you excitement or if that causes you to kind of gulp and think, ooh, that God is watching us 24/7 with what we are doing and how we are using our gifts. There's a few things I want to say about that. One is we're going to look at 5 different very quick things about how we should work with, knowing that God is our boss, knowing that Jesus is Lord and we're serving him. So number 1, we work with a spiritual power. And that's such an important thing, that as you go into the workplace, wherever that might be, unlike so many people, you have spiritual power. You don't just have caffeine in the morning to get you through the day and something to look forward to in terms of an interesting meeting or the paycheck. No, you have God with you. And you have the gospel, the good news, which is not that you are validated by what you do. That before you said anything, before you did anything, before you accomplished anything, you are someone who was loved and will always be loved by Christ. That must be our identity. That must be our deepest identity, and actually something that motivates us to have joy in the workplace. That the God that we worship smiles over us as we use our gifts for his glory. The wonderful film Chariots of Fire, it talks about 2 runners. It reveals the story between 2 runners who are very competitive with each other. But the 2 runners have a very different motivator for why they ran the 100-meter sprint. One of them is a guy called Harold Abraham, and this is what he says of his motivation for running. He says, when I run, in that 10 seconds, I try to justify my existence. How sad that many work and get all their identity from work. That if something goes wrong, if they go into some sort of capability, some sort of performance management thing, their life has fallen apart completely. And how different it is for Eric Liddell in that story, which is obviously the main character. because he acknowledges that when he runs, he does so because God made him fast. And he says that when I run, I feel the pleasure of God. And isn't it wonderful we go into our work environments, that we go with a joy, that we've got gifts, and even if we're in a kind of what would feel like a dead-end job, that we're able to somewhat use our gifts given by a generous God that we don't deserve to have in the first place, and yet he has given them to us to work and to use for his glory. And anything that seems mundane, any dead-end job can become an amazing adventure because of the one that we work for. Paul says to the church in Philippi in chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God." I think it's really important that we are those who exhibit that joy in the workplace. I remember when I was a teacher, and I didn't particularly feel like a very joyful person. I felt like I was on edge all the time and not particularly happy. But someone then said to me once, "Why are you always joyful?" I was thinking, is there someone behind me? Have you seen me? And they were my year partner at the time, and they said, "I think your joy stems from the fact that you're a Christian." And obviously it gave great opportunity to talk about my Christian faith and who I was ultimately performing for. And so there should be this sense in the workplace, because of our boss, that we're able to show joy, that we have a positive attitude to work. You hear a lot about the work-life balance, and sometimes things are presented like work is this evil thing that you kind of need to keep in the balance between all the other things going on. Now, work is a wonderful thing as we fulfill our calling, as we use our gifts for his glory. So we should be positive about work. We work with a spiritual power and a spiritual purpose. Secondly, we work, if we want to be a witness, we work with a moral compass. Look at verse 22 again. "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything." Whew, you might think, "Tim, you don't know what my boss is like." And then it says, "And do it not only when their eye is on you, and to curry their favour." You know, in the workplace, character is king. And if you cut corners, if you only do work as long as it gets recognition, and when the boss is in the room, and all the other times you're just scrolling on Facebook and just Googling different things, if you're not working as a team player, if you come in late and clock off early, no one's going to care about the Christian message at all. Because they're going to think, "I don't want to be like that. I'm not sure what God they worship. They have no integrity." Tim Keller tells a really compelling story of a boss's response to an employee who made a significant error, and an error that should have cost her her job. And her boss, being a man of faith, took the blame instead. He defied what most bosses would do, which is to take credit when the employee does something good, and then let their employee take the blame when mistakes happen. And that single act impacted her so greatly that she confronted her boss and she asked him, why was he doing what he did? And after he reiterated multiple times that it was all part of his job, the boss eventually let on that he was a Christian and integrity was important to him. And it was as a result of his actions that this woman started to explore the Christian faith and started to go to church. It was in his actions that gave him the opportunity to start to share. So we work with a spiritual power. We work with a moral compass as Christians to be a witness. And then thirdly, we work ready to share the good news. 1 Peter 3 verse 15. I mean, this is a verse, if you don't have on your fridge or at your desk, you really need this one. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always Be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Wonder how prepared you are to share the good news with others. In all that preparation that you do, getting that presentation ready, checking you're going to be able to travel to wherever you are with work, how much thought and how much preparedness do you do to share the gospel with others? Because sometimes it may take you by surprise. As I talk to many people, I'm finding more and more, whereas it used to be a very odd, quirky thing to be a Christian, and people would find out about what you did in the weekend and soon want to change the subject. More and more, and I'm sure you're finding this, people are interested in knowing about your faith and how it impacts you. It impacts how you spend money and how you use your time and what you believe about life and your philosophy for life. A few weeks ago, Heidi was in the middle of some very important work. I don't know what she really does as a lawyer, but she was doing something of importance, and someone turned to her and said, "So what does it mean to be born again?" I mean, could you get a more straightforward, helpful question? And I don't know how you would answer that question. And she gave what sounded like a really good answer to me in the limited time she had between that and going on a phone call with an important client. But you know, we can't just say to someone, "Well, come on an Alpha course." They might come on an Alpha course and an Alpha course near them. But we've got to be ready in those moments to share something with people who are curious, that they may see that what we believe is so deep within us. And of course, to do that well, we need to build relationships with those who are in our team. It's a shame that you can get Christians who work very hard and yet no one really knows them very well. When it comes to that after-work event, they just want to go home. And you can understand you want to go home at a busy... But it's so important that we get out there and we get to know our colleagues and we make the most. We seize the opportunities to go out for a drink, for a meal. We get on those WhatsApp groups that we'd all like to mute and archive and get rid of. That we get involved in that we show that we are sociable. Because it's then, when people are unwinding and opening up, that we're all shining and then maybe some questions come to us. So we need to work ready to share the good news. Fourthly, we work ready to stand for the good news. This is such an important thing, and this is becoming more and more important. In the workplace, it used to be about the work ethic, about your routine and working and integrity in terms of not lying and not gossiping. Increasingly, it's becoming about the world we live in with policies around things to do with sexuality and gender identity and so many other things. It's becoming hard, and it may feel like as a Christian we're being policed about what we can and can't say. The Apostle Peter and the other apostles, when the Sanhedrin were trying to silence them, they simply said this in Acts 5:29. We must obey God rather than human beings. And when it comes to an ethical dilemma you're facing, here's a few things to be thinking about. I remember having this in teaching. The deputy head, there was something he wanted to lead on. He wanted to change the school, the whole culture of the school. And he wanted our school to work towards Stonewall's Gold Award. And not only did this mean teaching the reality of sexual diversity and that people identify differently on gender, not only do these things exist, which we want to teach kids about, but that these things must be embraced and at all levels celebrated. And I, as a Christian, with the Bible in one hand, found it hard and uncomfortable. Well, here's a few things if you find yourself in that sort of dilemma today on whatever it is. First thing you must do is, it's not about being antagonistic and polemical as a Christian. We don't want to be known more for what we're against than what we're for. So we work as good colleagues and we care for people and we love people. But the first thing we do is we must pray. Every day we must pray for wisdom and discernment. That we're caught in certain moments where we could really put our foot in it, or we could actually say something really helpful that would challenge someone's thinking. Secondly, we need to make sure we're always seeking counsel from mature Christian believers. I wonder, within your field of work, do you have a mentor? It's good to have a mentor in general, but do you have someone, if you're in the NHS, someone else who's a nurse or a doctor, someone else who's a teacher, someone who's an accountant or a lawyer, whatever your job is? Within your work, if it's quite a big office and there's many staff, do you have some sort of Christian network that you can be a part? Because the things you're facing, the challenge is going to be for many other colleagues who are also asking questions. And so to have people that can come alongside you and whom you can hear their perspective and how you might deal with certain things is really crucial. Important thing when we face an ethical dilemma, and often we're told, this is the new practice, this is the new policy, this is what we're getting from HR, and this is all going to be implemented. It is so important to not work it out with the whole staff team necessarily there, but to go to your supervisor, your manager, and have a respectful conversation with them. That you can go to them, this is all allowed within modern day work practices, to speak to them about your concerns and to see if your belief can be accommodated, whatever that difficult situation is. And many employers are willing to work with an employee's religious convictions. And they'll do that if they're approached with much respect and care, and knowing that the person who's coming to them is a hard-working person who has shown in many areas of their work to be competent, to work for excellence, and they want the good of their company, the good of their organisation. There's no straightforward answers, but there's some guidelines that can help us as we face ethical dilemmas. And as verse 24 says, the thing to keep in mind is, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. That he is the one who we give account to. He is the one that we're doing it all for. And if there comes a time where we have to put our head above the parapet, speak out against something, and we lose our job, then we may have to go down there. But it's very good. If you go on the Evangelical Alliance website, you can find some really helpful guidelines about work practices, employment law, and all sorts of things with some of the ethical dilemmas we are facing as Christians. So we work to share the gospel, we work to stand for the good news, and then finally, point 5, we work for justice and fairness. Look at Colossians 4, verse 1. Masters, this is now employers, provide your employees or your slaves with what is just or right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. And this really is the golden rule of Jesus, that employers should treat their employees as they would want to be treated if they were also in that position. And if you're a Christian employer, you need to always remember that you are also a person under authority. That every master, every CEO must give an account to the CEO of the whole universe. And so it's worth reflecting in your work practice. How am I using my authority? How am I using my power? Is it to advance myself, or is it to give good leadership to this company? Am I someone who listens compassionately to the needs of employees? Or is my goal about me, my reputation, how I make money, however ruthless I need to be with people? Maybe we need to ask our questions. If we're managing anyone in the workplace, am I setting an example with my integrity? I've been called to lead, to model good behaviour? Or do I compromise and then cover things up? The founder of Chick-fil-A, obviously a big restaurant in the US, when it was first founded in 1946, just after the war, it as a restaurant was closed on a Sunday, and it still remains closed to this day. And the whole was obviously very different sort of thinking about the Lord's Day on a Sunday and all this sort of stuff with laws about what you can buy and sell. But the idea of Truett Cathy, who was who started up Chick-fil-A, was that they really wanted their employees to have time with their families and also to attend their local church. And Cathy's slogan was this: put people and principles before profit. And actually that's a really good motto for us to have today if we have any sort of authority or power over someone else. That our work should be about caring for people. Our work should be about doing what is for the common good. Our work should be a place where we are working towards justice and fairness. Our work should be places where we live out our Christian principles, not a place where it's about profit and individual gains at all cost. So I hope those reflections have helped you to think over whatever you do work-wise. I'd love to talk more at length with you about working out your own job and calling, but it's so important that we see this area as key to how we exhibit our faith. That yes, we need to earn, but primarily we are called to serve God, and we do that by loving our neighbour, loving our colleagues, sharing the good news with them, standing for the good news, so that the ultimate boss, who is Christ, will say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Amen.